Welcome to the Relationships Decoding Podcast.
Okay, so, we love to get deep into these psychological topics. And this time, you've brought us some seriously interesting stuff
Yeah.
about this idea of projection.
That's right.
And I'm really excited to unpack this with you.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating because it really gets to the heart of how we see the world, and especially other people.
It seems like this idea of projection kind of pops up everywhere. Once you start to see, it's kind of like, wow, is this really how much of our interactions with people are colored by this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it this way. We all have these, parts of ourselves we're not so crazy about, right? Maybe it's, that little voice of insecurity or, a tendency to be a bit too judgmental. Whatever it is, we often try to shove those things down deep, keep them out of sight.
Right, like our own little mental basement.
Exactly. But Freud's genius was in recognizing that these things don't just disappear. They kind of, they find a way to sneak out.
So instead of dealing with them head on, we kind of toss them on to someone else.
Project them right out there onto other people. Like a mental magic trick, Now you see it, now it's on you.
Kind of a get out of jail free card for our own psyche.
In a way, yeah, but the problem is it can really mess with our relationships and even our own self-perception.
Right, because if you're always seeing your own flaws in everyone else, it's hard to connect authentically, right?
Exactly, and you end up reinforcing those negative beliefs about yourself and the world around you.
So how do we even begin to unpack this idea of projection? Where did this idea even come from?
Well, like so many big ideas in psychology, we have to go back to the OG himself, Sigmund Freud.
Of course, the father of psychoanalysis.
Back in 1894, Freud was the first to really lay out this idea of projection as a defense mechanism.
A defense mechanism. So it's like our minds are building little fortresses to protect us from these uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Precisely. It's like our ego saying, hey, I can't handle this, so let's just pretend it belongs to someone else. Problem solved, at least for the moment.
Yeah, but those problems tend to come back to bite you, don't they?
Oh, they sure do. And that's where things get interesting because Freud's daughter, Anna Freud, really expanded on this in her book, The Ego and the Mechanisms of Defense.
So she took her dad's ideas and kind of ran with them?
Absolutely. She really delved into the nitty-gritty of how these defense mechanisms work, including projection and how they shape our personalities and relationships.
And then we also have Melanie Klein, who kind of added another layer to all of this, right?
Melanie Klein, yeah, she was a fascinating figure in psychoanalysis, and she brought this concept of projective identification to the table.
Projective identification, that sounds kind of intense.
It is. It takes projection to a whole other level because it's not just about attributing your own feelings to someone else. It's about actually influencing their behavior to match your projection.
Whoa, so it's like you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
In a sense, yeah. Let's say you have this deep-seated fear of abandonment. You might start acting in ways that push people away, constantly testing their loyalty, picking fights, you name it.
And then when they finally get fed up and leave, you're like, see, I knew it. I'm unlovable.
Exactly. You've unconsciously orchestrated the whole thing to confirm your deepest fear.
That's both fascinating and kind of terrifying.
Right? Because it shows how our internal world can have such a powerful impact on our external reality.
So we've got Freud with the initial idea, Anna Freud digging deeper into the mechanics, and then Klein adding this whole interactive element.
That's a good summary. Yeah, and I think to really understand this, we need to get specific. Like how does projection actually play out in our day-to-day lives?
Okay, so let's bring this down to earth.
Yeah.
What are some concrete examples of projection that our listeners might be able to relate to?
Well, one of the most common types is what's often called classic projection, and it's basically just what it sounds like. You take a trait or an emotion that you don't like about yourself and you slap it onto someone else.
Like that coworker who's always complaining about everyone being lazy, but they're always the last one to show up and the first one to leave.
Bingo. Or the friend who constantly accuses their partner of being controlling when they're actually the one who's always micromanaging everything.
It's so much easier to point the finger than look in the mirror, right?
Right. And there was this quote in the material you sent me that really nailed this. It said, "The qualities you resent in others are often the ones you refuse to acknowledge in yourself."
Wow, that's powerful. And, it makes me think about the example we have of Sarah, the marketing director.
Oh, Sarah, yeah, she's a textbook case of classic projection.
Always saying things like, You can't trust anyone in this industry. It's all just smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
And she's super suspicious even when people give her genuine compliments.
Yeah, and if you dig a little deeper, you start to see that Sarah herself has a bit of a reputation for being, less than sincere herself.
So it's like she's projecting her own insecurities about authenticity onto everyone else.
Exactly. She can't handle the idea that she might be phony, so she convinces herself that everyone is, and that way she doesn't have to face her own stuff.
It's like she's built this whole narrative to protect herself from the truth.
And as Anna Freud so eloquently put it, projection is like a funhouse mirror. It distorts reality to reflect our own insecurities.
So we're all walking around in this distorted funhouse of our own making.
Pretty much. And, another common type of projection is what's called complementary projection. And this one is all about feeling persecuted.
Persecuted like everyone's out to get you.
Exactly. It's not just that you see your negative traits in others, it's that you feel like they're intentionally targeting you with those traits.
Okay, so let's say you're always running late and you blame it on traffic or your alarm clock or whatever.
Right, and then when someone calls you out on it, you get defensive and say, they're just trying to make you feel bad, like they're out to get you.
Yeah. And I know a few people like that who are always the victim.
Oh, don't we all? And, a classic example of this is Jennifer, the client director.
Oh, yeah. Jennifer, she's always complaining about how her team is slow and holding her back, but then she's always missing her own deadlines.
And when anyone tries to point that out to her, she's got a million excuses.
Yeah.
The system's rigged against her, she submitted it somewhere else, blah, blah, blah.
The excuses almost seem fabricated.
Right. And, the psychology behind this is really fascinating because it suggests that Jennifer might have a really harsh inner critic. That voice that's always telling you you're not good enough.
Oh, I know that voice all too well.
So instead of sensing that internal judgment, she projects it outward, making it seem like everyone else is against her. And that way she can maintain this sense of being the good guy, the victim.
So it's like a defense mechanism against her own self-criticism.
Precisely. And, there's this great quote by Otto Kernberg who said, when the internal court of judgment is too harsh, people manufacture external enemies to ease the burden.
That's a really powerful image, and it perfectly captures the dynamic of complementary projection.
Absolutely. Now, the third type of projection we want to talk about is projective identification, and this one is a bit more complex.
Yeah, we touched on it earlier, but how is it different from the other two?
Well, with classic and complementary projection, you're basically just attributing your own stuff to others, but with projective identification, you're actually unconsciously influencing their behavior to match your projection.
So it's like you're not just seeing your fear reflected in them, you're actually making them act in ways that confirm that fear.
Exactly. It's a really powerful and often destructive dynamic, especially in close relationships.
Can you give us an example of this in action?
Sure. Think about Elizabeth. And her husband, Elizabeth, has these deep-seated insecurities about being loved, and she's constantly suspicious of her husband.
Like she thinks he's having an affair or something?
Not necessarily, but she interprets everything he does through this lens of suspicion. He works late, he forgets to pick up her dry cleaning, he misses a call, and she immediately jumps to the conclusion that he's pulling away from her.
So she's projecting her own fear of abandonment onto him.
Exactly. And here's the thing. Because she's constantly accusing him and questioning his love, he starts to feel suffocated and resentful.
So he starts to withdraw, which then confirms her suspicions.
Exactly. She's created this self-fulfilling prophecy where her own fear has actually driven him away.
Wow, that's heavy. And it really highlights how our projections can have a ripple effect on the people around us.
And Freud actually talked about this. He said projective identification compels others to act in ways that validate our deepest fears.
It's like we're unconsciously scripting the drama of our own lives.
And often we don't even realize we're doing it.
So it's not enough to just understand the different types of projection. We also need to be able to recognize it in real time.
Absolutely. And that's where these 4 recurring patterns of projection come in handy.
Patterns. So it's like there are these telltale signs that can help us spot projection when it's happening.
Precisely. And the first one is role reversal, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. You accuse someone of doing the very thing that you're doing.
Oh, I see this one all the time. Like the person who's always complaining about drama, but they're the ones who are always stirring the pot.
Exactly. Or the friend who's always accusing their partner of being clingy when they're the ones who are constantly texting and calling.
And the irony is that they're usually completely oblivious to their own behavior.
Yeah, that's the hallmark of projection. It's unconscious. You're not doing it on purpose. You genuinely don't see it.
And Freud actually said that projection is at its core an unconscious act of self-deception.
And the second pattern is blaming external forces, which we touched on earlier with complementary projection.
Yeah, it's like when something goes wrong, it's never your fault. It's always someone else's or some outside circumstance.
Right, so you fail a test and it's because the teacher hates you, or you miss a deadline and it's because your computer crashed.
Anything but taking responsibility for your own actions.
Exactly. And, Anna Freud had a really insightful observation about this. She said, the louder the accusation against others, the greater the underlying guilt within.
So the more vehemently you're blaming everyone else, the more likely it is that you're actually the one at fault.
Precisely. It's like you're trying to drown out the voice of your own conscience by shouting even louder.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got role reversal and blaming external forces. What's the third pattern?
The third one is distorting reality. And this is where things can get really tricky because you're not just misinterpreting a single event, you're actually filtering your entire perception of reality through the lens of your projection.
So it's like you're wearing these special glasses that only show you what you want to see.
Exactly. And anything that doesn't fit your narrative gets ignored or twisted to fit.
And we saw this with Elizabeth, right? She interpreted everything her husband did as evidence that he was pulling away even when he was just busy or stressed.
Precisely. She was so convinced that he didn't love her that she literally couldn't see any evidence to the contrary.
And the modern psychoanalysis perspective on this is that a projector's cognitive lens actively blocks out information that contradicts their preconceptions.
It's like they're wearing blinders that only allow them to see what confirms their fears.
Okay, and the fourth and final pattern.
This one is called self-protective projection. And it's a little different because it's not about projecting negative qualities onto others. It's about projecting your own unacknowledged desires or ambitions.
So it's like living vicariously through someone else.
In a way, yeah, like the classic example of the parent who pushes their child into a particular career path that they themselves always wanted but never pursued.
Or the friend who's always trying to set you up with someone who matches their own ideal type.
Exactly. And Melanie Klein had a really interesting theory about this. She said that parents often disguise their own unresolved traumas as their children's life goals.
Oh, that's deep. So it's like they're trying to heal their own wounds through their children.
In a sense, yeah. And it can be really damaging because the child's own needs and desires get completely lost in the process.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the different types of projection, the recurring patterns, and the psychological mechanisms behind it all.
And I think the big takeaway here is that projection is incredibly common.
Like we all do it to some extent.
Absolutely. It's a normal part of being human, but the key is to become aware of it so that we can start to manage it.
Because if we're not aware of our projections, we're basically living in this distorted reality of our own making.
And that can lead to all sorts of problems in our relationships and in our own lives.
So how do we actually start to stop projecting and build more genuine and healthy relationships?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, the first step is to really commit to self-awareness.
Okay, so like taking a good hard look in the mirror.
Exactly. And that means paying attention to your thoughts and feelings, especially when you're feeling triggered or judgmental.
Because those are usually the moments when projection is most likely to rear its ugly head.
Right. So the next time you find yourself getting really annoyed with someone or making snap judgments about them, take a step back and ask yourself, is this really about them or is it about me?
Am I projecting my own stuff onto them?
Exactly. And, there's this really helpful technique called journaling that can be super useful for this.
Like just writing down your thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, but specifically try to focus on those moments when you're feeling triggered. Write down what the other person did or said, and how you reacted both emotionally and behaviorally.
So you can start to see those patterns emerging.
Exactly. And, once you start to recognize your own projection patterns, you can start to challenge them.
Challenge them? Like how?
Well, one of the best ways to do this is to simply ask questions.
Questions like what?
Like, let's say you're convinced that your boss is out to get you. Instead of just stewing in that resentment, try going directly to them and saying, hey, I've noticed that, and I'm wondering if there's something going on that I'm not aware of.
So you're basically forcing yourself to get out of your own head and into a more objective reality.
Precisely. And, you might be surprised by what you hear. They might have a perfectly valid explanation for their behavior, or they might not even realize how their actions are being perceived.
And even if they are being a jerk, at least you've addressed it directly instead of letting it fester.
Exactly. Communication is key. And, another really important step is to start focusing on your own growth and healing.
So instead of trying to fix everyone else, focus on fixing yourself.
In a sense, yeah, because the truth is that the more we work on our own stuff, the less we'll need to project it onto others.
So it's like an inside-out approach.
Precisely. And, there was this really powerful quote in the material you shared that said, when you can confront your own shadows, you no longer need to cast them onto others.
Wow, that's beautiful. And it really speaks to the transformative power of self-awareness.
Absolutely, because ultimately projection is all about avoiding our own pain and discomfort.
And the only way to truly heal is to face those things head on.
And, as we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to encourage everyone listening to really embrace this journey of self-discovery.
Because it's not a destination, it's an ongoing process.
Exactly. And, the more we understand ourselves, the more compassion we'll have for others.
And the less likely we'll be to fall into those traps of projection.
And, for our listeners, think about the people in your life who really push your buttons.
Like the ones who just drive you crazy.
What is it about them that triggers such a strong reaction in you?
And could it be that those qualities are actually reflections of something you're struggling with within yourself? It's like they're holding up a mirror to your own shadow side.
Precisely. And, this week I challenge everyone listening to just observe your judgments with a little more curiosity.
Not just asking what's wrong with them, but also what might this be telling me about myself?
It's a powerful practice, and it can really open up a whole new level of understanding in your relationships and in your own life.
It's all about turning those triggers into opportunities for growth.
Absolutely. And, that's what this deep dive has been all about, empowering ourselves to see the world more clearly and to connect with others more authentically.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap things up for today.
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into projection. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep growing.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and see you next time.